is Samira, and I am here from Youth Speak, and I'm so excited. We have another Speak Real podcast episode for you all. And over here, all we want to do is just share the positivity and messages from our youth speakers and just really get to know their personal stories. We believe that stories are a powerful tool for empowering the youth and just being able to be in it together. And so today I'm really excited to be introducing one of our youth speakers. Her name is Shabnam Mahboobi, and she is going to be sharing just her journey through mental health and the challenges that she's faced in her life.
Guys, how are you? How are you, Samira?
I'm great. I'm very great now that you're here.
Yes. It's a
But
pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm actually looking forward to having this conversation with you.
yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm really excited to be getting into your story. And before I begin, I want to ask you a question just to kind of break the ice. It is, if you could describe yourself in one word, just any word that you aspire to be, what word would it be?
Well, a word that I aspire to be would be free.
Free.
Yeah.
How would you describe that word?
To be honest, I feel like the whole concept of freedom, it's a very hard thing to achieve. It just begs the question of, are we ever free? But for me, being free means having free will. Just kind of doing things for myself and making decisions for my own well-being instead of being influenced by all that is around me, whether it's people I love or friends or work, anything else, just being free of all of that.
I find free is such a powerful word, and it does mean such a different thing to different people. And I love how you chose that word as something you aspire to be. So now I find that even using words to describe ourselves can be a bit difficult, which is why I like to begin with that. Uh, but now I want to really get into your story. And how was it like for you just growing up?
Growing up, I was actually born in India. I was there for the first 10 years of my life. And those first 10 years were quite blurry for me just because I went through like some of my hardest traumas during my first 10 years. And so a lot of it, I feel like I've just kind of lost so many pieces due to PTSD. But I have some very nice memories with my father. Like I have a memory where we would go on walks at night and he would buy me like the best vanilla ice cream that you could ever taste. It was delicious. You get it from a vendor. And I feel like a lot of the memories that I have and a lot of the things that I remember are experiences like that with my father because I didn't have a lot of them. He used to work a lot. But that's basically all I try to remember, and everything else just kind of feels dark just because of the traumas that I went through.
It's really heartbreaking how you mentioned that you did suffer through PTSD and really having to block out those negative experiences in your life. However, it is really positive to know that you did cling on to those memories that you enjoyed with your father, even though your childhood sounds very difficult and traumatic.
Yeah, it definitely was not easy. I can tell you that. And to be honest, when you're that young, it's very hard to process trauma. You don't even know that you have trauma or how bad it is. It's basically a seed, and it doesn't bloom until you reach teenagehood and you get older. And that's when you start to see the effects. So it can be very confusing because you don't know where it came from. And then you have to really dig in and realize, oh, I see what happened. This is when like I got the wound, And I'm only feeling the pain now because now my brain can actually comprehend what I'm going through,
Mhm.
what I have not understood till now, and I've been suffering and I didn't realize.
Hmm. I think self-reflection is such an important part of that journey, and being able to reflect just on times when you're able to process it, because it's so true that when you are younger, it's harder to understand what you were going through. So being able to reflect that on that when you're older is just, it makes it easier. It doesn't make it easier, but it definitely makes it a bit more clear as you go through it. Uh, Now I want to ask you that after you did move to Canada, what are some of the biggest challenges that you did face in school and
Well, once we moved to Canada, it was a whole new world for me. I was simply happy because I figured a lot of the bad things that I was going through uh, before we came here was finally going to stop, and I was going to be free, and I was going to start over. So that was the first feeling. And so when we came here, it was great. Um, we actually first came here to Vancouver. We used to live there for a couple of months, and I started to build a life there. I actually made two friends. They were Afghan as well, and I used to go out a lot. I used to be very active. I loved school as well. And then we had to move to Toronto suddenly, and that is when I felt like everything just kind of uprooted again for me. Because once I came to Toronto, um, the atmosphere was definitely different. So was the culture. And so when I went to school, I was bullied quite a bit for being the new kid. Um, and as well, I couldn't really make friends. And anytime that I tried, I felt like, um, or at least I experienced that they were just trying to use me, take advantage,
Mhm.
just because I was the new kid, and they just wanted to make me believe that I was their friend. Let's put it that way. And you're 11 years old, 12 years old. You've gone through all this trauma, and you've never really had consistent friends. So you go for these things. It's normal. But it wasn't until the end of basically like in grade six, I had to move schools, change schools at least four times.
Wow.
Yeah, because we moved from, India, and then we moved to Vancouver, then we moved to Toronto, and then again I had to move my neighborhood in Toronto. So grade six was actually quite a rocky one for me. Um, but it was definitely a year of lessons for me, where that was when I first started to see exactly what I was going to endure in middle school for the next 2 years. The bullying and the lack of connection with the people. um, I hadn't learned how to basically talk to people either, so my interpersonal skills were like zilch. So that was definitely a struggle as well. And then there was mild language barrier, considering I went to an English medium school back home, so it wasn't too bad. But there was still context was still missing, so I struggled with that as
Mhm.
well. But that was one of the
Mhm.
main things.
That is so difficult, having to move four times just while in middle school. And on top of that, not just moving, in the same city where you could maybe at least see your friends that you had made, but moving definitely to different cities completely and uprooting everything. So it's really great that you were able to kind of go through it and like come out of it and overcome it. However, I know that during those times, like instances of bullying, that can really affect someone during middle school. And it doesn't, even when you're a new kid, like it's such a cliche to think that, being bullied as a new kid, but it happens so much.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And yeah. However, hopefully, I hope that through more awareness and just bullying prevention programs and just teaching those things to kids at a younger age, it does make that difference.
No, certainly. I cannot agree with you more. This is why we do what we do, right? Um, everyone needs to understand how important it is for a child to know at a young age how to handle and deal with their mental health and all these different contributors that affect their mental health. They need to be aware of that. And the sooner they are aware of it, the better they will be equipped for the future.
Hmm. Yes, I totally agree with you on that. It's psychoeducation. Education on mental health is just so key and important.
Yep.
And back when I was in high school, I don't think we had that component in our curriculum. However, nowadays, I believe it is different. So there is hope in that. What are some of the struggles that you faced in high school, and how did you overcome those struggles?
Oh boy, there's a time. um, High school was honestly somewhat of a blur, and I feel like a lot of people can relate to that. High school is when I really um, began to learn about myself, and I it was the time basically I was coming out of middle school, and at this point I had already built all these barriers around myself because of the bullying that I'd faced before, or the lack of connectivity with people. So I kind of had become this person. I'd isolated myself, and I went into high school with that mentality that it's just going to be me, and I have to be strong, and I'm just going to get through everything. So high school is when I really faced the most issues when it came to interpersonal skills as well as social situations. Like I met a very nice group in grade 10, and that became like my first consistent um, group of friends per se,
Mhm.
because we ended up being friends most of high school, and we shared a lot of great experiences together. But that was like the first time ever that I could actually say that I had a consistent group of friends and that I connected with so well. It was also the time where I had my first relationship, and it was a very strong one. Let's put it there. And it started with let's just say this person was the first person that I opened up to, and it definitely built that connection. And it wasn't until later on that I would find out that it was like a trauma bond. That's basically what we built the foundation of our relationship on. And um, let's just say it didn't go very well the next few years, even though we were dating for quite some time, because him and my friends clashed a lot. So I was kind of stuck in the middle, and there came a point where I basically distanced from my friends because of it. I had to kind of like, I felt like I had to choose, but I didn't want to choose. But there was just so much going on, so many dynamics. I mean, it's high school, right? Um, for someone like me, I actually didn't think that that would be the case, that I would be going through these experiences, because I was so good at being on my own at this point. And yet I was literally thrown into the deep end, and I didn't even know how to swim. And let's just say everything just kind of imploded. And it took me a long time to recover, because this was also the
Mhm.
time where I realized I had PTSD, and I was going through a lot of depression, and I was going through a lot of anxiety, which at the time I didn't know was anxiety. I literally thought I was going
Mhm.
insane.
I want to just reflect back on some of the points you mentioned. One was the trauma bond, which I believe is when two people have experienced trauma and they are finally able to open up to one another. And I find that that is so powerful, because having a person that you trust and you're able to speak to really does make you feel so uh, like you have someone, that you have support.
Yep.
So I can imagine that struggle. And high school is also a time where we don't know balance in relationships.
Oh yeah.
Uh, so I can imagine how difficult balancing friends and a relationship could be. And now I just want to now get into, you mentioned the PTSD, depression, and anxiety. Those are such difficult things to even process.
Mhm.
So, how is that like for you? What are some of the biggest challenges you faced from having PTSD, depression, and anxiety?
Um, To be honest, one like with PTSD, like depression, I went through in my entire high school, as well as most of the years that um, follow follow that. But I was able to pull myself out of there slowly, mainly for the sake of my family, and I also because after high school I started to go out a little bit more and try to just kind of um, spend time away from home because my depression was highest. I was always at home. I didn't even go out with my friends in high school, like not
Mm,
even to like the mall behind the school. So that definitely played a big role. So once I started to go out and I went to the campus, I commuted to campus for university and things like that, the depression slowly started to dissipate. Um, as well with PTSD, I feel like I did not understand my emotions. I did not know how to talk to people. I constantly sought validation from everyone around me because once I opened up to that one person, I couldn't stop opening up. I felt like it
mm,
opened it up a floodgate, and I just kept seeking that validation and that comfort in anybody that I got close to, and to the point where it almost became toxic. Um,
mhm,
PTSD for me has led to a lot of toxic relationships, whether it be with my family, with my friends, or any relationship I've been in. It's PTSD has definitely created a lot of toxicity in my life, in so many
mhm.
ways. But I have fought tooth and nail to find ways in order to overcome that.
Um, Thank you so much, Shabnam, for sharing just some of those challenges. I know how difficult it can be struggling with mental illness and other mental health issues. And what are some of those things that you did to kind of overcome these challenges?
Um, to be honest, it was definitely, I did not have a lot of coping mechanisms at the time. So I did have some negative coping mechanisms where, because I was home a lot, I would watch a lot of TV. Don't get me wrong, I still did really good in school, but I had to work really hard for it, but harder than I needed to. I used to watch TV a lot, and I basically learned anything that I needed to learn about the culture from TV, and that kind of helped me go through and connect with some of the people that I did. But it also made me um, start to lead a very unhealthy lifestyle. So I didn't eat very well. I used to feel really depressed, and I was in my room for hours and hours and hours, and all I could think of was my trauma and my depression and being very lonely and afraid. This was a daily thing for me. So imagine going through that for
Mhm.
years, living like that for years. It was definitely um, a whole other level. So I did not have the best coping mechanisms because I didn't even ask for help at the time. I didn't know how. I honestly did
Mhm.
not know who to trust, had major trust issues from my trauma. But eventually, what I started to do is, as I mentioned earlier, poetry was one of my biggest outlets. But aside from
Mhm.
that, I listened to a lot of music, and that kind of helped me zone out all the other um, voices and noises that I didn't want to listen to anymore with regards to my PTSD and the depression. Um, I remember I used to have, to this day, I've had a lot of situations where I can't cry in public. I can't cry in front of people, even if it's someone very close to me. It was very hard for me. So the only way that I was able to let it out was to watch a really emotional, really sappy movie to kind of bring those
Mhm.
emotions out in private and let me release. Um, these were kind of the mechanisms I was using back then because I didn't know any better. On the other hand, now I have one of the biggest and best decisions I've made is I've started therapy. And it's
Mhm.
something that I wanted to do when I was a kid. But again, where I come from, that is not considered as something someone who is strong would do. It's considered as a
Mhm.
weakness if you go see a therapist, or you're deemed
Mhm.
as someone who's mentally unstable. Um, it was definitely frowned upon. So now I go to a therapist, I go out, I go for walks in nature. That definitely helps me a lot. I go for long drives and sing on the top of my lungs. To be honest, that helps release a lot of stress. Um, I have made some friends who actually understand me and who have gone through similar struggles, and that's why they are able to respect mine. And that to me has been one of the greatest achievements that I've had with regards to battling my PTSD and depression, to be able to connect with people um, that can empathize with my situation and make me feel safe.
Mhm. You've mentioned some really amazing points there, especially with just even growing up, you didn't have any coping mechanisms. But in that in itself, things that you mentioned, like watching TV at the moment, maybe at that time, it was something that was unhealthy because it contributed to your depression. However, that is something that is a mechanism, which is distraction. So, a lot of distraction strategies there. Also, music is such a powerful tool that can really soothe ourselves in times when we really need. And of course, one that is so important is therapy and seeking that professional help. And I noticed that you mentioned so many of those cultural differences that you faced, having those ideas that, crying is a sign of weakness. I can relate to that as well. So I want to hear a little more about that part of your life. Just what are some of the biggest challenges you faced with your culture, being Afghan and facing mental health issues?
Oh boy, honestly, mental health itself is a concept that's rarely mentioned in my culture. It is not something that you are taught is carries any significance, whether it's as an adult or as a child. So where my parents came from, to be honest, there was no such thing as mental health or how it can contribute to your daily life. They were basically they lived a very routine life where they took care of the parents, they went to school, they did what they need to, then they got married, and they listened to their in-laws or they listened to their parents some more, and that was their life. um, any trauma that they went through, and Afghans have seen a lot of trauma, as you may
Mhm.
know, in general as a community, but individually, like my own father has gone through a lot of trauma on his own, and he never had time or made time to cope with it because he was too busy pleasing those around him, particularly his parents and his family. So he never had the time. And when he could have made the time, he didn't make his mental health a priority. And that is something that's very prominent in the Afghan culture. People don't talk,
Mhm.
unless it's to be pleasant or hospitable. When you meet a stranger or your family. But other than that, people don't talk. They don't communicate. They don't talk about mental health. They don't talk about their traumas. It's actually considered a sign of great weakness if you talk about anything you've gone through, because they have this mentality where it's like, just get through it. Like, why are you
Mhm.
being such a weakling? You know what I mean? Per
Mhm.
se, there are a number of words I can use, but obviously let's not make it inappropriate. But there's so many, and like I said, it's mental health is not a priority in our community. And there were times where I think once or twice I just let it slip, where I told my father that I was having issues with my mental health, and I think it was only one time that he actually responded, and he's like, what, like, are you calling yourself crazy? Like, what's going on? Or another time
Mhm.
where I talked about his mental health and how he didn't handle this very well or that very well, and he's like, "You guys are just trying to pin me down as someone who's insane. I'm not insane."
Mhm.
So to them, mental health equals insanity. That's what's
Mhm.
prominent in the Afghan culture, and it's definitely something that I grew up on. Despite the fact that my father was very supportive in the sense that he always wanted to talk to us,
Mhm.
and yet we still couldn't talk to him about these things.
Mm-hmm.
So that was
Stigma.
definitely a struggle. It's a big, big, big stigma. And
Yeah.
I had a very hard time overcoming that. A lot of confrontations, a lot of arguments. My father and I used to be a lot closer before that. Basically, I was his shadow, and after that, there was a lot of drifting, a lot of separation, a lot of heartbreak. But
Mm-hmm.
slowly, slowly, I have learned to mend that and help him see my perspective.
Mm-hmm. Stigma is so prevalent in our society still today, in some of our communities. Uh, Even in Toronto, as we're here, stigma is so real. So I can only imagine in just other countries how different it can be. And it's so important for us to speak up about it and for just us to spread that awareness. And that's why I find it's very empowering for youth to voice their opinions on mental health and just even personal struggles. Now, I want to ask you one last question, which is if you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
Oh, I've thought about these questions for quite some time now. My advice to my younger self would be to speak up.
Mm,
Speak up and listen. Listen to your mind, listen to your body, listen to your soul, and don't ignore them. Listen to yourself and that call that comes out from inside of you that says, enough, you deserve better, you can be better, you can heal, and you are worth more than you can ever imagine. So just listen to your body and your mind and your soul and help yourself heal, because a broken rope cannot help anybody. You cannot pull others
mhm,
up if you are broken on your own. And my God, I was broken.
mm,
And if only I spoke up to my teachers, to my family, to a therapist, anybody, I could have been healed a long time ago. And I still am not healed. It's a struggle. I'm a work in progress because it's not a straight line. But I have
mhm.
learned to listen to my call. And that's the advice that I would give.
That's amazing, Shabnam. Thank you so much for sharing that piece of advice. I think a lot of youth and just anyone would really be motivated by that and inspired, because listening to yourself is such a true thing that you can do, to be vulnerable, to be open, and just hear what your intuition is telling you. Now, just to end it off, I want to ask you one last question, which is, now that you have shared your inspiring story, what is one word that you would describe yourself as?
Resilient.
Yes,
Yes.
resilient.
If I am nothing else, I am definitely resilient. No matter how many times and in how many ways, I will always get back up.
Yes, fall 7 times, get back up 8.
Yeah, you got it.
Always. Thank you so much for joining us, Shabnam. It was amazing to have you here on the Speak Real podcast. And thank you all for tuning in to our third episode. Just if you liked hearing our youth speakers share their story, like, subscribe, comment, and follow our socials. And you can also support our Youth by Youth project by donating at youthspeak.ca.